The first step of all recipes that contain active yeast is always to proof your yeast. The reason for doing that is to make sure that you don't fail the recipe and end up wasting a lot of dry ingredient. It's important for the water to be around 120 degrees Fahrenheit, which is equivalent of 50 degrees Celsius. Remember, we don't want the water to be too hot at this point, so we don't kill the yeast and end up with a flat bread. If you don't have a thermometer, touch the water. If the water is too hot for the touch, it's too hot for the yeast. Next, we're gonna add all the sugar for this recipe into the water and dissolve it, creating the perfect meal for the yeast to wake up and activate. Add all the yeast to the water. And stir lightly. You don't really have to dissolve all the yeast in the water, you just have to make sure that it has contact to the water. And then let it proof for around 5 minutes. And if it foams like this, it means that your yeast is good to go. For the second step, we're gonna sift all the flour in the recipe. I know that the whole wheat flour is not gonna go through the sifter completely, but be careful with that. Don't discard what is remaining inside of the sifter, just put it back in the bowl. The reason for doing this is just to eliminate big lumps and actually breathe some air into the flour, so it's easier to mix the rest of the ingredients, and especially if you're using your hands or a wooden spoon, you're gonna thank me for that. For the third step, just add the shortening and the soft butter. And if you want to make this recipe vegan, just add some vegan margarine instead of the soft butter and you're good to go, because the rest of the recipe is pretty much vegan. Add salt. And also add the yeast solution proofed in the beginning of the recipe. If you're using a stand mixer or hand mixer like I'm doing on this video, you're gonna use the dough hook attachment. But if you're doing this manually, it's only gonna take a little more time to get everything incorporated. At this point you might need that extra cup of flour, but it's not for sure. Depends on the conditions on your kitchen and everything, but you only really need if it's not coming out of the walls of the bowl like you see in the video. Step number 5. You're gonna lightly, and I emphasize lightly, flour the surface that you're gonna work the dough on. And why is that? Is because you don't want, a very heavy dough at this point. And this dough is very delicate. This dough doesn't need to be kneaded very intensely. You can see other videos online. There are people that really beat this thing up. This dough is very delicate. You don't need to do that. Just roll it. And this step only takes around 5 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes, until you have a very uniform and easy to work dough. Form a ball and you're ready for the next step. Step number 6. Lightly grease a large bowl. You can use cooking spray like I'm using here, you can use butter, you can use shortening, you can use vegan margarine. This is just for the dough not to, glue to the bowl while it's proofing the first time. Put this bowl on a warm place and let it proof for around 45 minutes to an hour. And don't forget to cover the top of the bowl with plastic wrap. That really helps. After 45 minutes, you want to keep an eye out for the dough to make sure that it gets to double the size, would be the ideal. When it's done, we are ready for the step number 7. And just remembering, you guys, this is the point at the recipe that you want to freeze your dough if you're gonna freeze this recipe, because it's not fully proofed yet, and whenever you defreeze it overnight, it's gonna proof one more time and it's gonna be ready for the oven. This point is also known as the punching down the dough point. This dough is very delicate, so don't do that. Okay, just press it down. You only want to really get rid of the big lumps of air inside of the bread and not completely squish it together. For first timers, I recommend you guys to follow what I'm doing on the video, which is pretty much the 101. I want fresh home-baked bread in my kitchen. And we're gonna knead this dough one more time, but this time is very lightly, and I would say 10 to 15 times tops. It really doesn't take that much because we only want it to come together and get rid of those lumps of air. And then you're ready to roll your bread into the logs that is gonna actually be shaped as the final product. You know those fancy ways that you can braid the bread and stuff like that? It's at this point, but for 101 I only gonna roll it together in a loaf, and this is how I do it, pressing it together and rolling it, but at the same time stretching it to the sides a little bit, because you want to keep the proportions of the pan that you're gonna put the bread in, and pinch the bottoms, because you don't want the bread to proof and open on the bottom and lose its shape, right? You worked very hard so far to have the shape, so you want the bread to rise correctly in the final proof. Place the bread inside of the bread pan. I'm using a 9 by 6 inches bread pan, but you can use any other pan. Just try to be proportional, because this bread is gonna rise a lot more. For the final touches, place the plastic wrap loosely on top of it, and loosely I mean do not seal it. Just place it very loosely and let it proof for around 1 hour and a half or 2 hours, or until it looks like this. Remove the plastic wrap slowly so you don't damage the top of the bread, and bake it on a preheated oven at 425 degrees Fahrenheit or 215 degrees Celsius for around 25 to 30 minutes until it's golden brown or sounding hollow when you tap with a wooden spoon on the top of the bread. Remove the bread from the baking pan immediately and let it cool for around 20 minutes or until it's cool to touch, so you don't burn your hands, because the bread's gonna be very hot. This bread is very easy to make, has great texture, and is absolutely delicious. And because of the number of ingredients and the amount of ingredients that you actually use to make this bread, I classify this recipe as affordable. As for any other breading recipe, I would suggest you guys to keep this bread on an airtight container. The reason for that is so it doesn't dry out. It doesn't have any chemicals to prevent it from drying, but if you don't have a container that is big enough for both breads, it's not a problem. Just use plastic wrap. In the plastic wrap, usually this bread lasts around 3 to 4 days outside of the refrigerator, but if you want to use this bread for longer, especially if you're on diet, I would suggest you to keep inside of the refrigerator. You can also freeze the bread at this point if you prefer. Just don't forget that usually takes around 18 hours to get to room temperature and is ready for consumption. For the full recipe, don't forget to go to thenowadays.channel.com, and I hope you guys enjoyed my half and half whole wheat bread recipe. Let me know how it turns out for you, and please share your pictures with the hashtag Affordable Kitchen Show on Instagram or Twitter. If you guys have any questions, leave the questions in the comments down below. I'm going to try to get back to you guys. I don't know how this is gonna work out. This is my first video, but please don't forget to subscribe. so I can continue to bring you guys new and affordable recipes like this one. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!